Nepal and with the people of Nepal very seriously. One of the big topics that we're thinking about is around this conversation on inclusion in the context of what we call green, resilient, and inclusive development, where we also see the role of digital technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, creating new firms, new sectors, new drivers of growth as a big part of this overall story. So we're going to be talking about this. Let me actually get really into the topic of the discussion here today with a first round of questions from my panelists here, where we're going to talk a bit about the opportunities that digital innovation can bring to Nepal. And so I'm going to start with you, Bahar. Little bit about your organization, Impact Hub. It's an innovation hub for young entrepreneurs who have early stage startup ideas. And this is, of course, seen all over the world as a great driver of growth and innovation. Where do you see the opportunities for young people in Nepal to take advantage of that? Over to you.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Bahar. I'm here representing Impact Hub Kathmandu. Under Impact Hub, we also have the Fab Lab Nepal, which is a digital fabrication lab that allows for rapid prototyping and sort of digital design and fabrication. So the opportunity that we sort of see emerging and sort of the gap that we're serving out of our hub is the fact that young people now are exposed to so much through media and technology because of their cell phone access. And with that, they're not really provided the platform to actually execute, right? So we don't see a delay in sort of the knowledge access that people have. And so what's happening is the education system is not necessarily providing the platform for them to practice those skills and really sort of design solutions or problem solve in the way that they want to. And then we have the job market that actually isn't engaging them in the way that they want to either. And they're also not being sort of fulfilled financially, and they're also not being engaged in a really inspiring and motivated way. So what did they opt for? Entrepreneurship. They say, you know what, I'm just gonna give it my own shot, and I'm gonna see if my idea can fly. And that's where we fit in. So a hub like ours really just provides an enabling environment for those ideas to be converted into something possible. But I'll be really honest, we're not really building viable businesses, right? Because the failure rate is gonna be high. They're high risk, they're young people, they don't have a lot of skills. However, the unintended outcome that comes out of a space like ours is the fact that these young people now have solid problem-solving skills. They have a way to strategically look at where they need to fit in order to drive Nepal's development. And so they decide, I'm gonna go get work. They go abroad to go get those skills. But some of them do come back. But I think one of the things that we are sort of providing is access to digital skills through our Fab Lab, rapid prototyping. Most engineers don't have access to that sort of equipment in their universities. And it's a community-based setting. So that means it's not even just for students, but it's for entrepreneurs, dropouts, migrants that come back that want to really test out new ideas. That's the space that we're filling.
Thank you. And that actually reminds me of this fascinating analog I heard many years ago when we were talking about the long-term impact that's created with failure. And there's this beautiful analogy that I heard of the shattered mirror, which is when you shatter a mirror, you don't end the mirror, you get 1,000 smaller mirrors. And so you have failures, but then those failures actually can also turn into something interesting down the line and create the skills. There's a lot of that that's happened all over the world. Thank you. We'll continue that line as well. Dory, over to you really to hear a bit more about Utopia, which is building a platform for urban tech entrepreneurs in emerging cities. Your network of city labs are urban tech startup studios, very interesting, to help local entrepreneurs build the startups that can help improve the quality of life in cities. So how can more people become entrepreneurs and engage in a manner that does that and improves the quality of life in cities like Kathmandu? Over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm Dory. Thank you everyone for joining us. I think I'd like to start first with the urban context. So a lot of people ask us why cities. So I think everyone is pretty well aware that globally we're urbanizing quickly, very quickly. Half of the current global population is in Asia. And by 2050, we'll be doubling our urban population, and 90% of that growth will be in Asia and Africa. And so in these cities, the services and infrastructure are yet to be built. And even though we see a dense population in cities, it doesn't necessarily mean that those systems that exist are serving the people who live in the cities. So, and we see all these really sticky challenges like climate change. It's incredibly difficult. It will be nearly impossible to address those challenges without addressing them in the megacities of tomorrow. So we see cities as the arena to build the next era of civilization. Think of that as you may. And and particularly in Kathmandu, there's projected to be 8 million people here by 2100, and that's nearly 4 times of the current population. And can you imagine basically what your daily commute would look like at that point? Even in 20 years, it will be double the current population. And so can you imagine how we might be living at that point? And, to draw on that theme of inclusion, those who are excluded may be even more, there'll be even a larger amount of people. So, so if we look at cities as essentially our playground or context, we look at tech as an enabler. Tech specifically is providing a lot of decentralized solutions to cities currently, and we see it as a huge opportunity to improve urban living in emergent cities. And so, for example, just to take one example, mobility as a service is something that's, being promoted and developing. It's essentially like a singular platform that aggregates all of your live transportation information so that, things like costs, scheduling and conditions are all in one platform. And the reason why this is really interesting is because as our cities have been growing, there are more and more people, and therefore more and more service are needed, and more service providers have come to the scene. That's why we've seen a lot of ride sharing and more distributed forms of transportation popping up. But for users in the city, they then become quite confused because there's such a complex system of transportation, and this is really just an example, to have to navigate. And so then they may end up making choices that aren't exactly sustainable, and not even in just the climate version of sustainable, but things that actually may make the system more inefficient, like adding to the traffic. So platforms like this can also increase the amount of usership by basically, making it more accessible, making people understand what decisions they're making in terms of how to navigate the city, and therefore have a bit of a two-way conversation with the service provider so that they can be more responsive to the demand. And so thinking then about who the agents of change might be given the enabler and the context, we focus on entrepreneurs. So we really believe that they have the ability to shape the future of the cities. These service providers that I was talking about before, oftentimes start out as these startups. They see a gap in the market, and they try to, in small ways, in lean budgets and short amount of time, can prototype, pivot, iterate, quickly even change completely their narrative of what they're trying to do by just essentially learning from what they're doing, and they're doing it in real. And it's really low risk for them. So, they don't they don't face any sort of, maybe from some early investors, but usually investors will be there because they believe in their vision. So, and importantly, they're also building a revenue model around what they're doing. So that means that idea, that intervention, is actually something that will be able to continue to serve the users that they're trying to serve, and also expand. So, so at Utopia, as you mentioned, we're an urban venture studio. We are focusing a lot on essentially a lot of what Bahar had mentioned around preparing entrepreneurs and working directly with them to build urban tech companies. So we commit to building a MVP of the startup, and then we also commit very long term with them to essentially get them to their first 100 customers. And then we work on creating a regional pathway for them so that they are connected to our regional and global networks and resources, as well as have the ability to scale to different cities in the future, whether that be in the same country or in the region or globally. So yeah, so that's essentially, I hope I answered your question.
I think you did. Can you just clarify what MVP means, just so that everyone...
A minimum viable product.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks a lot for that. And again, as an institution where we're looking at cities as the future, a lot of urbanization happening, especially in this part of the world, and going back to the ideas of green resilience and inclusion, I think the kind of work you're doing really feeds into that in terms of making sure that cities are cleaner, they're more inclusive, and of course are also ready for whatever natural disasters, which we know we need to prepare for. We've seen that play out over the last couple of years. So it's really interesting to hear about that and the role you're playing there. So let me turn to Ruchi, to you now. And you're from Fuse Machines, an organization that's looking to democratize artificial intelligence. Very powerful statement there. You run a training program for artificial intelligence and machine learning specialists. Can you share your thoughts about how women in particular might benefit from those skills, especially in a place like Nepal? Over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Siddharth, and thank you everyone for being here. So before I tackle your question on the benefits of the AI skills for women in Nepal, I want to talk a little bit about our mission to democratize AI and what that really means. So the term could mean a number of things to different people, right? But when Fuse Machines started back in 2013, our goal was, let's make sure everybody in the world is able to harness the potential of artificial intelligence as a technology. And to do that, we have realized that enabling access to education and access to talent are two key things, which is why we tend to focus very much in our training programs, with the end game being we want to create a credible pool of AI talent. Now, training has been a part of Fuse Machines' DNA right since the start. We are founded and led by our CEO, Samir Maske, who also teaches AI at Columbia University. And he has been a very strong believer of the fact that talent is everywhere, but unfortunately, opportunities are not. So with our training programs, what we are essentially doing, and in many ways, this is a training program concept that's been rooted in the idea of equity and inclusion, is we are bringing these opportunities to underserved markets, both inside Nepal and outside of Nepal, including in underserved communities in the US, where we are seeing the want from the people to want to either be aware about AI, want to specialize in AI, and then there are corporations who want their executives or their managers to be upskilled in AI. They want them to know the basics of AI so they can apply it to the business. Now, why are we focusing so much on this talent creation aspect, right? So the reality is today, AI is so omnipresent. Each and everybody who is in this room today has experienced or engaged with AI in some capacity, whether you're scrolling through your Instagram feed, the cute cat videos you're getting, it's because of the past preferences that AI algorithms are able to detect. Or you are making a complaint to a customer care representative, you are being directed to a chatbot. That's an AI-based application. So AI is so present, which means businesses are looking to implement the technology to advance their digital transformation agendas. But the reality is, people who are skilled in AI, there aren't that many. Globally, there is a global talent shortage when it comes to AI. And we are looking to tap that. We are looking to address that challenge with the training programs. Now, why would that be relevant for the women in Nepal, right? How does that benefit? And this would be for women, not just in Nepal, but around the world. But more specifically in a market like Nepal, we have noticed that women tend to shy away from STEM careers. And when I'm saying STEM, it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. When we look at the reasons why they're doing that, it's manifold. But some of the recurring ones are they feel these jobs are very demanding, they want to maintain their work-life balance, or there is just the societal biases that they have to overcome. Now, AI skill sets, how that addresses these three, two or three critical challenges is really number one, all of a sudden having the AI skill sets, you're much more marketable. You get to demand a really high salary. And which woman would not want financial independence, right? The other aspect is it's industry agnostic. Every business gets to benefit from AI, which means whether you want to pursue a career in marketing, go ahead. AI can help you create compelling brand campaigns. you want to pursue a career in healthcare, AI could very well help you detect the next cure for a disease. Right? So because of its myriad applications, you're no longer constrained to just one business function or just one industry type. And there's also the idea around work-life balance, which AI in many ways is promoting, and we've witnessed, especially right after COVID, is we are working in remote settings. We are working as distributed teams. And AI has enabled automation. AI has enabled efficiencies. AI has enabled managers and leaders to understand how their companies and employees want to engage with them. So the business processes have been much more bettered because of AI. So because of these main three things, so the choice of working from home, the flexibility when it comes to industry business functions, as well as the high pay, this should make a compelling case for women in AI.
Sure, thank you. And it's very refreshing to hear that, because a few years ago, one of the big concerns that we were all hearing about, I'm sure many in the audience remember this from 2015 and so on, is that the machines are going to take over, it's going to be Terminator, and the Skynet's going to like run everything, and we're going to lose all these jobs, and there were all these sort of apocalyptic scenarios being shown. So it's very refreshing to hear that from today's perspective, not only is it that you're seeing a lot more job creation, but it's also potentially going to be inclusive, it's going to create opportunities, and it's going to hopefully get us to that holy grail of the work-life balance. So I'm going to hold you to that. We're going to now run to a second round of questions, and I'm going to reverse the order for this. So we've talked quite a bit about the opportunities and how each of your organizations has been working with different groups within the country and working with different stakeholders within the country. Like to talk a little bit about now the challenges that you're facing and what really are these barriers to creating impact that you see, which I'm sure, given the range of experiences you have and the way you're engaging with the tech sector, with whether it's local governments and this transition to federalism that Nepal is undergoing, obviously it's going to be a big part of the political and political economic transition here. Obviously thinking about things like AI, which is a huge opportunity, as you've talked about, for Nepal to distinguish itself. I was very impressed, for example, to hear about the kind of exciting work that's going on in the country and the applications you can have, even in things like climate change and so on. But also where the regulatory framework needs to be very much on top to make sure that those safeguards are in place to harness the benefits and minimize the risks. But then also when you think about entrepreneurship and the kinds of challenges you've already alluded to in some sense, that people are aware, but there's opportunities that need to be tapped in. Let's talk a little bit about these challenges. I have a common question for all of you, and we start, Ruchi, with you first. So what might be the biggest task that each of you see in your organizations, especially as you might want to unlock and help Nepal unlock impact at scale in a manner that promotes inclusion? Over to you.
Sure. So when we think about inclusion, there's so many aspects of it, right? But if I had to focus firstly on the gender diversity aspect, and thinking about what organizations like ours in the private sector can do, is we want to enable representation. We hear every day, we are reading articles every day, representation matters, and I can speak of it from first-hand experience, is that when, many years ago when I was in engineering college, in a class of about 65 people, I was one of the 5 girls sitting in the class. That's roughly 8%. Today, I feel very proud to be working for an organization where 40% of the management team is women. About more than 25% is female employees, generally, including engineers, right? But to get there and to get beyond that, we need to make concerted efforts, and that is from an organization perspective. We need to take a look at how do we advance representation of women, which means what are the kind of HR decisions do we need to make? What are the leadership decisions do we need to make? Do we create quotas for hire? And these are some of the things that we as an organization are doing, but I would actively promote the idea of other organizations, private, public sectors, to do it, so that it's not just about women in engineering anymore. It's about women across different fields in leadership positions. So representation, I think, is something that needs to be tackled. Now, when we think about inclusion from the perspective of underserved markets and bringing in people from different backgrounds to work in technology or fields like ours, would be even as I talked about remote work, right, work-life balance, it's only possible when people have access to devices. It's when people have access to the basic necessity like internet. That remains a challenge. It's not just a Nepal problem, it's a global problem. Infrastructurally, not every place is sound. How can we as companies help there is we can seek out public-private partnerships. We can work with education institutions, for example, to see if we can provide scholarships to engage more people in training, facilitate more women to take our courses. We could do it in the form of subsidizing devices, so we could work with the government bodies, for example, to see if we can make that happen. But it's all about finding those strategic public-private partnerships. And finally, and this is the biggest, I think, point, is a lot of it comes down to general AI awareness, right? Or general tech awareness. People are hearing about tech, people are experiencing it, but they don't really know about the impact of it at a larger scale, in the economy scale. And to create that awareness, it's a grassroots problem. We want to help people from the elementary level understand how tech can impact them. And when I say elementary, it's almost like going to a pre-K student who is, for example, perhaps showing interest in a robotic toy. And we can say, you know how this works? I can tell you how this works. And the onus for that lies with the teachers, the educators, the parents, right? So you're all of a sudden nurturing a tech-focused, tech-forward mindset. So I would say that's pretty much the critical challenges. But again, it's a laundry list. There's so many things we want to do, but so many only we can attempt to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Dory, your thoughts, please. Biggest tasks and challenges facing you.
Yeah, time limitations. So I guess we'll just focus on two. So City Lab, Utopia City Labs are a platform that brings together people, process, and resources. But in the ecosystem here, we really see two main stumbling blocks. So one, and they're probably not surprising, but the first one is around how might we get more funding into the urban tech space. So we see a lot of, and particularly I'm talking about the early stage where we work, but we have heard so much about, a lot of buzz and visibility around early stage entrepreneurs, but in practice, in reality, the allocations financially don't really match that buzz. There's a huge amount of appetite for investment in Nepal, in and outside, but for Nepal, and we've seen that a lot of them do go into the larger scale infrastructure projects, and of course that has benefited us as a whole, everyone in the country. But ultimately, these are also based on finite resources. So I'm talking about obviously hydropower, and also even real estate. Those are finite resources, and so we also need to think about how might we diversify the portfolios of these investments if we're going to maintain this economic development, but also be in line with what is available to us. What will happen with the mega hydro projects when the run of the river is so low or is purely seasonal, and due to climate change. So I think more and more of these portfolios should be dedicated to early stage ideas. And of course, like Bahar mentioned, these are risky investments, but we have to start somewhere, and then we need to create a breeding ground for all of these ideas, and some of them will eventually take shape, and then hopefully, and this is also from the investor's perspective, they will have something to invest in the future, to transition their investments into. It's essentially what petroleum-based investments are going through right now. And in the recent past. And then the second thing is around essentially how do we prepare, get entrepreneurs ready to basically, develop these ideas, build these ideas that shape the cities in the future. And, so we have, again, a lot of buzz around entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of desire and attractiveness around the idea of being an entrepreneur. But at the end of the day, it has so much to do with your grit, your dedication, and really pure stubbornness to just continually go back to the same problem day in and day out, even though you get kicked down the line, several steps every other day. And really that also creates this, or requires a bit of we try to encourage this, I suppose it's something you can develop, is the mindset to really look, when you see an obstacle, you try to look around it. You look above, below, behind, like how can you get around this thing? And so that is something we're really hoping to encourage. And yeah, and one side note to this, since you talked about representation in your organization, we're a very small, lean startup ourselves, but we recently ran a cohort on urban climate tech. There were 6 entrepreneurs in residence, as we call them, and 5 of them were female, which also happens to be the same ratio of our team. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but we didn't intentionally do that. It just happened to be that ended up being our final cohort. So I think, it's also seeing people in these chairs, like my fellow panelists, and enablers in the ecosystem to also push forward that, give the space for people in these types of platforms.
Yeah, thank you. Bahar.
It's so nice to be actually at this end, because as I'm deeply listening to my fellow panelists, it's so complementary, the work that we're all doing. And so I would say the biggest task and challenge for us right now is to scale our work. Because we've been so Kathmandu focused and centric for the past 6 years, it's really critical now that we figure out how to take our work out. So we're constantly being asked by stakeholders and by different partners to say, how can you multiply the work that you're doing? And it basically goes back to exactly what you both were saying. One of the things is there are not enough resources that are allocated to this high-risk work that we're doing, and it's very resource-intensive. And so incubation, incubation is exactly that. When do we put infants in an incubator? When they require a lot of intervention, it's expensive, and it's a lifeline for their ultimate survival. Who's going to actually invest in that? Not a lot of people, and not a lot of men in suits. So a lot of that hand-holding work, actually when we designed our business incubation program globally, were run by women. And they said, you know what, Bahar, this is actually an afterthought in most ecosystems, and it's not led by the women, the men in suits. Oop, faux pas, I said women. Men in suits, but it's actually something that's an afterthought when people realize, oh, there's not a pipeline now. We actually need, and this is the developing South, right? So this is the global South. And so these were incubators in Latin America and Africa that said, it's kind of natural that you're initiating this, but it's not going to be easy because your ecosystem is going to be pretty male-dominated. And that's exactly what we saw. So when we're asked to scale our work, we're going into communities and ecosystems that are also male-dominated, right? And so how are we going to develop human resources to engage women, not only as providers, but even as users within the digital economy, right? So we're talking about female-led households. We're talking about migrants that are sending money back to their families. We're talking about communication platforms. We're talking about automation. We're talking about all these services that require digital skills, both for designers, for providers, and for users. However, there's a dearth of human resources, and there's a dearth of financial investment being put into a very high-risk space. So we're thinking about, can we scale out a micro SME program to engage women with solid business support services to roll out their ideas, not so that it's scalable, not so that it's going to be a unicorn, but just so it becomes a self-sustainable sort of family, sort of revenue source so that their men can come back home. And at a micro level, it's kind of happening. They come back and say, oh, you're using the money I sent home. You already bought land. You sent the kids to school. And now you've set up your own business. Isn't that remarkable? I can come back home. So when we talk about, and then they're going to figure out how to automate, how to cut costs, how to do things, because they're learning from younger generations that are there, and the fact that their migrant partners are requiring them to engage in the digital economy. So I do think that things are going to happen very quickly, much quicker than the institutions and the regulations can keep up with. But I think the hard part for us truly is around how are we going to do exactly that? How are we going to take our work outside? How are we going to scale it so that it's more accessible to more people when the investment is not there, the mindset is not there, and the human resources are not there? I hope I wasn't too depressing about my take-home message.
No, it's interesting because you've raised a very interesting sort of idea, and I'm actually going to go slightly off script because we have a little bit of time. There's a number of countries around the world where there's a large immigrant population working internationally, sending remittances back home. And oftentimes the conundrum or the difficulty facing governments, policymakers, etc., is about how do you leverage those remittances coming back, not just for consumption, but also for investment. And so it's really interesting to hear that idea. And places where that works out is where then in some cases really it gets redirected towards small business creation and in a manner that's sustainable. So that's a fascinating idea. In fact, let me go a bit off script if I could, and I'm going to kind of open this up for the three of you to whoever wants to take the plunge first. We've talked a lot about creating impact that lasts. Maybe if you could spend a minute or two talking about one or two stories that really have grabbed your imagination and attention and maybe motivated you in a difficult time, keep you going. A story of impact that you've seen firsthand, if you want to share that with us today. Someone's life's changed, or an interesting idea that came out, or Bahar, looks like you want to spring forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can share a story of a couple of our startups that required automation and digital skills, but these were two young, single sort of founders that came into our space, had an idea, brilliant idea, one of them actually serving the needs of women, and through the space that he was in parallel, he's working on his MBA, you know, at King's College, because there's this urgency for young entrepreneurs to do it now, which is brilliant. And we need to harness that, or else we lose the momentum. So he would, you know, straddle between, do I work on my business or do I study for my exams? And I said, it's up to you. But I said, at the end of the day, you got to do both. So he figured it out. In our space, he found his co-founder, which I thought was really, really lovely. And when we became Impact Hub Kathmandu, which prior to this we were Nepal Communautaire, and what I found out from the global network, which is over 100 plus impact hubs globally in over 60 countries, is that is one of the best sort of value adds for the hub, is that they find their co-founder. Now he's an amazing entrepreneur. He's created jobs. He's totally harnessed investment, and he has an environmentally sustainable business model, and he's growing, and he hasn't left Nepal. And that's a huge success, and he's employing women along with, you know, other folks as well. And I think for us that's, and we've got plenty of those stories, you know, and I think that's the reason why we need to do what we're doing.
Sure. Ruchi, Dory.
So it's not a one-person story, but I think one of the programs that we have found resonating for us as a company here in Nepal, which has actually created an impact at scale, is the AI fellowship program that we run. Right? And this program essentially is open to anybody and everybody, irrespective of their backgrounds, industries, prior tech degrees or not. As long as you are someone who is interested and can prove that you have the necessary computer science and mathematics skills, and this could be skills that you could have learned from, let's say, an online channel, those people are welcome to join the programs. Of course, we want to maintain the quality of the program, which is why we have several assessments. But once into the program, it's a fully funded program where people get to learn specialized AI skills. And those people, a lot of them go on to get hired by Fuse Machines. And there itself is the impact story, which for a lot of our employees is a story of pride, because they then go on to work on not just a small scale issue or a small scale business problem. They are working with global enterprises, solving mission critical problems for them, right? And the pride of that, being able to do that from a country like Nepal, I think that there's a lot of impact to be garnered from that in and of itself.
Thank you. Dory, do you want to share a story with us?
Sure, I'll go a little bit more micro. Actually, when we first started out and still continue to this day, we work a lot using design processes and things like design thinking, which you might have heard about, also systems thinking and emergence theory. And so we're always continually building out our arsenal of design processes. And it has been really interesting and exciting for us as a team, but it also makes it really difficult to hire. So we found it very difficult to find people who already, even if they didn't already have exposure to these ideas, they have the amendment, they're open to it, right, open to learning. And so one of our current team members started as a fellow and came from more the architectural background, and then, you know, over time really grew into her role as a facilitator and leader in the design space. And it has just been so wonderful to see that. And it's something that, you know, it's very micro, it's one person, but we feel like already she's able to, you know, impact other people through workshops and also one-on-one mentoring in terms of our startups. And so we just, you know, that I think, and she has said that essentially she has continued to stay and learn and grow so much with Utopia because she's just never bored. Not to say that she's done other jobs, but essentially she's always challenged. And yeah, and so we're hoping that that's also a culture that can be translated to, you know, the companies that we work with.
Sure, thank you. And of course, it's little drops of water, little grains of sand and all of that. So it's great to have these individual stories because it adds up to something much larger. Thank you for sharing that. I think we have a few minutes now for audience questions and maybe any thoughts. I think some of the organizers might give me a bunch of questions that they might have received. Do we have any questions from the audience? If not, I'm going to have to come up with some questions myself, and you've already heard me talking enough. All right, let me actually then warm you guys up by posing something. So let's say if you look globally, right, and you've all worked internationally, what could be some interesting maybe examples or countries that Nepal can look to, thinking about the ways in which from bringing lessons from there, bringing experiences from the outside to a country like Nepal, and really shaping the future here. I mean, I've had the pleasure of working in about 30 countries in my time at the World Bank. I've worked in landlocked countries which are much smaller in their populations and economy than Nepal, like tiny, like I'm talking like 500,000 people or 2 or 3 million people populations. But some of these, like two examples that come to mind are Eastern European countries of Moldova and Armenia, countries that many people can't often find on the map, but both of them in their own ways are IT powerhouses. Moldova has thousands of young people who export software and IT services. It's a huge income generator for the country. They have great sort of ideas around, they have a virtual IT park facilities. There's been a lot of private investment that's been mobilized to motivate young people to gain new skills, so the kind of program you have. I look at Armenia and I see a smaller size country which is really distinguished itself through its diaspora network in that case to bring major semiconductor manufacturers, for example, to the country, investing there in design and high-end engineering services and skills. So again, a pretty big source of their exports and making them very globally connected, as you can imagine, with the rest of the world. Are there some similar examples that you've come across, or a country you visited or a city you visited, which inspires you maybe in some way that Nepal could also look at for its inspiration? Who might like to pick up on that? Cities, maybe. Yes.
Yeah, you read my mind. So I am in two minds about using this as an example because I think it gets visibility for other things that I don't necessarily think are applicable to Nepal's context. But as a city-state, Singapore has a lot to offer. I'm not talking about the skyscrapers, the glass buildings, the clean streets, the very orderliness of it. That I could really do without as in a city. But in terms of the in terms of their urgency, essentially, as a city-state, they cannot, who are realizing that their oil reserves are dwindling and they don't have many other natural resources to rely on. But essentially, they're really pushing innovation in all regards, especially in food, because they have so little land, they have to import so much of their own food. So there's a lot of, there's so many government-backed initiatives, but also that has created a appetite, I think, amongst the innovation community for people to just get their hands dirty, get in there, start doing things, and then as a result, it's not just the programs that exist, it's not just the platforms, but people have then a bit of a pure kind of collaborative environment that they can do on their own, even if they don't have the support of a program or a platform. So so I think the urgency there is something that we could really learn from, not just in Nepal, but in many other countries.
Thank you. Bahar? I do, but if you want to answer mine first.
I just came back from the Impact Hub Global Meet where that was my job. I was like, let me find other hubs and ecosystems where we can lift from. And there was basically a hub in Brazil that had this amazing MSME program with women. And that's the model that we're going to try and bring to Nepal, because they have some wonderful metrics also to track the outcome of that program, which is a huge part of being Impact Hub, is not just to do this work around assumptions, but to have some solid vetted tools to look at how we're tracking our impact over time. So that's one of the exciting opportunities that we want to lift from Latin America. The other one was from Zimbabwe. So Impact Hub Hirare is working on a really brilliant sort of circularity program. And so it's sort of startups that are looking at the circular economy. And we think that there's loads of opportunity, even organically. So many of our entrepreneurs are working around those models already. So we want to upskill ourselves and the ecosystem. It's kind of what you were saying, Dory. We're constantly having to adapt ourselves so that we're relevant. And so we're going to now sort of partner with the Harare team to look at how we can bring that model here to Nepal as well.
Wonderful. Ruchi, do you want to?
Sure. So instead of focusing on one city or country, I think as a market here in Nepal, we have, because it's almost a clean slate for us when it comes to adopting digital, or we have more of a runway than most of the other countries probably have, right? So with that in mind, I think we are at the best position to emulate as many ideas from different countries as possible. And when it comes to regulations and regulatory frameworks, that's where I think we can borrow a lot of ideas, especially when I'm thinking of it from Fuse Machine's angle and from AI. There are a lot of AI-based regulations that the US has started or the Europe has started, right? All we have to do is look at what would work for us from Nepal's perspective and try and emulate those, and then we don't have to do the work from the ground up. But outside of the regulatory framework too, I think there's a lot to be learned. Like from a diversity perspective, let's look at how Silicon Valley is handling things or not handling things when it comes to diversity, and choose to take the good things and leave off the bad. So yeah, so much room for emulation, I would say.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. We have a couple of audience questions. So let me maybe get started with one which I think is for all three of you as I read it. There's a question about how each of the work that you're doing and the organizations that you're with are really interacting or intersecting with the digital financial services developments and fintech developments that are taking place in Nepal. So I'm guessing you could respond to that in whichever way you'd like, in terms of how you're taking advantage of it, how you're contributing to the fintech revolution that we are seeing emerge in this country. Who might like to go first among you?
I'd be happy to. So fintech, well, from a client perspective too, we have a lot of financial companies, and when I think of fintech, I think everybody in financial services is in some way a fintech company already, because they are embracing technology. But if we are looking at just the fintech segment, which is looking to do things differently in financial services with the help of tech, we are advancing that through helping the clients with the talent services they need through helping the clients with the bespoke solutions they need, right? That's one way of doing it. But in many ways, we are also part of that fintech ecosystem, is that we are trying to propel fintech and the development of technology in financial services in the capacity of technology company by working through that system, meaning all of our transactions, all of our work is part of the fintech framework. So in many ways, we're ingrained in the fintech fabric.
Great. Bahar?
Sure. So I think we were talking a lot about how even though an entrepreneur may not identify as being a tech sort of focused entrepreneur, they realize quite quickly that they need to adopt technology to build efficiency and automation of services even internally. And so fintech is one of those things, especially during COVID, right? So many startups had to figure out either logistically how to deploy their product or service, right, to their customers using sort of digital frameworks, but also around payments. And so that has helped accelerate the adoption of some of these tools. And so we have seen that a lot of startups very quickly then have to figure out how to make it very easy for them to receive payments, not only from their customers, but also vendors and suppliers, and to also make payments to different vendors and suppliers. Can I just make a shout out that I love PhonePay? Okay, so PhonePay has, yes. And it's because, after being in Nepal, of like nearly 11, 12 years, I forgot how to write a check. I didn't know what to do in a bank. Rarely went to the ATM. And I had to then start being in a cash economy. This was 10, 11 years ago. And I was so frustrated because my signature never matched or silly things like that. It was just awful. And PhonePay truly changed my life. And I'm not just saying that because someone paid me to say that. No one did. Because it's so easy for me to spend money. I'm constantly flashing my face and QR codes all over the place all the time. So you can just imagine the spending power and the accessibility that you've brought into people's hands, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Women in remote communities, it's easy. It's easy to sort of engage with that platform. But the trust that needs to be sort of instilled in our communities to say this is legitimate, this is valid, I think we still have a ways to go with that. But the opportunities are remarkable. I really do think that fintech is going to unleash some really exciting possibilities.
Great.
Yeah, also not being paid to say this, but I just used Isewa for the first time yesterday. I think I was just telling some people here, and it was liberating. As someone who completely missed, the mobile payment revolution in the States, I just late to the game, but anyway, I'm here. So I think for us, it was really the idea of mobile-based payment or any payment that isn't in physical cash was something that was really difficult for some of our entrepreneurs to try and pilot. I think the focus has really been on the users, but it hasn't been later on the supply chain. So I guess by users, I mean the person who is finally paying for the product, but there hasn't been much focus. For example, there were some, urban mobility and urban food ideas that our entrepreneurs were working on, where essentially they had to liaise with, distributors of food or kirana basals or bus drivers and other transport operators. And they essentially said no, because I don't this is not hard cash. How do I know that I'm actually going to get this money? And then also, I need hard cash because I need to go tomorrow morning to buy food, to buy basically the supplies for the next day, because I don't have enough cash in hand until this day is over. So I think it's also about transforming that fintech technology to be adaptive to other parts of the supply chain as well.
Yeah, and in fact, just to add to that, one of the things that I've seen myself firsthand where we supported the implementation of it was a very simple mobile payments platform in a country that I won't name. But when the policemen started getting their salaries through that system, they started calling the headquarters asking if they had been given a 50% raise. because earlier salaries were being paid in cash, and there was all this skimming that was taking place through the different layers. So by the time the salaries would reach policemen and on the ground, 50% had disappeared. And so they thought that there was a mistake, and so it was quite interesting to the transparency, the accountability, and the clarity of those flows. So it's, in a way, it's interesting when people look at the QR code and a mobile phone and they're like, "Where's the cash?" And then you actually realize that it's an enabler of transparency and improves the services that are delivered. There's a question, Ruchi, for you from the audience. You're going to have to talk a bit more. So it's an interesting one. It's going to need some mental gymnastics, I think. So there's a lot of focus and a lot of excitement about the way AI can help solve, let's say, economic, social, or development challenges. But at the same time, we know that a lot of these problems can also be solved with very simple technical solutions or technology solutions. So the question really is about how do we balance this hype and excitement about AI while also recognizing that there could be some very simple technical solutions, maybe even institutional solutions that can be implemented. So how do we make sure that we aren't getting carried away, I guess, by the technology and managing the expectations of the workforce and the labor force that you're also preparing? Over to you.
Yeah. So that's a very good question, actually. So we shouldn't, and this is for any technology for that matter, not just AI, we shouldn't be embracing a technology just because there is hype around it, right? Which is why that when I was talking earlier about the grassroots level understanding and awareness across the board, and not just from an education perspective, but even the decision makers need to understand where AI's applications are, what the ROI looks like, and how much of that is going to cause a disruption within the workforce, right? And a big part of what you've said in that question is also brings into context the idea around are people scared of AI because they are scared that AI will take away the jobs, which is why are they looking for the other technologies as a substitute. The bigger question here is really to be able to understand will the different technology solutions be able to bring about the change that AI is set to bring in scale or at scale? And is the level of efficiencies that AI is set to bring, the automation that AI is able to unleash, as well as the level of insights that AI is able to deliver, will the different technology solutions, which I don't know what they are right now, but will they be able to replicate that and at scale? And that's the question that business leaders need to make, but with the balance that they don't want to disrupt the workforce. They don't want to create that hysteria within the workforce making people think that their jobs are a go. But at the same time, they need to focus on upskilling the audience, upskilling their employees, because the truth is whether it's any form of technology or AI, disruption is coming, and people need to know how to basically take on their jobs, but at the same time with the needed skill sets so they can complement the advancements from tech.
Sure. Thank you. I think that's definitely something. There was a very nice quote by Hal Varian a few years ago when this whole kerfuffle around AI and robotics taking over everyone's jobs. He said that what we need to do is try to figure out how people can develop the skills and the capacities to complement and use technology rather than be replaced by it. And so I think that fits in very well also with that idea. Let me just quickly check if there's any final questions or anything from the audience, any disagreements with anything our panelists said or that I might have inadvertently said. All right. If not, maybe I can close the panel just with a couple of observations. First of all, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for listening in. That was super interesting, and certainly thinking about the ways in which inclusion can help drive impact that lasts, is sustainable. I love alliterations, and so I was thinking about the word impact and inclusion, which are two I's. And I was thinking about the fact that a lot of what you all were talking about focus a lot on the idea that there needs to be a lot more investment in time and effort creating the right kinds of infrastructure. We talked a bit about the fact that maybe not everyone's connected, that there needs to be the facilities, the urban infrastructure needs to improve. So certainly there's a lot of investment that needs to take place there. On the other hand, also that institutions need to adapt, and you referred to this as well. Ruchi, you talked a lot about this very complex and constantly evolving regulatory framework around AI to make sure that the benefits really outweigh whatever costs or risks take place. And this is obviously something very important. Even in the fintech sector, we talked about that as well in terms of cybersecurity, making sure that personal data is protected. So there's certainly a lot of work everywhere that needs to be done. It's a constant effort there. But what I also took away from this was that, what I really like about the stories that you shared with us, also thank you for that. It went off script a bit over there, but that was it, we handled it well, is the fact that in the end it's about individuals and really motivating individuals to think about what opportunities exist and create a pathway towards that future, defining what that future looks like and helping them along that way. And then hopefully when we really manage that, and it becomes its own self-sustaining cycle that will help Nepal, and I'm pretty sure Nepal and the rest of the world as well, to really leverage technology and leverage the opportunities that technology can bring to impact positively the economies and the societies that we all live in. So thank you so much for being here. I again want to thank our panelists for their time and sparing all the effort prior to this to prepare such a smoothly run panel. It's all credit due to you. And thank you all in the audience, and of course to the organizers for inviting us all to be here and share some of this time and these thoughts with all of you. So thank you all. I'll let our MC take over. Yes, thank you.
And on behalf of the entire team, we'd like to go ahead and thank you, Siddhartha, as well as Bahar, Dori, and Ruchi. Thank you very much for giving us your precious time. For now, we've got a small video that we'd like to go ahead and show to our audience present here, as well as to our audience watching us at home. Let's head on towards the video for PhonePe Digital Economy Conclave 2022. Welcome back. I'd like to go ahead and thank all our sponsors and our supporters for the second edition of PhonePe Digital Economy Conclave. I'd like to thank our title sponsor, PhonePe, as well as powered by Nepal Telecom. Corporate sponsor, Visa. We'd like to thank them as well, endorsed by Nepal Rashtra Bank and Ministry of Communication and IT. Also supported by Nepal Clearing House, payment partner, eSewa, knowledge partner, the British College, app partner, Eventsmo. You can download the app Eventsmo from the App Store, as well, from the iOS Store, as well as from the Android Store, Play Store as well. And you can simply go ahead and ask any questions throughout the session. If you feel like you want to go ahead and ask any kind of questions, then feel free to write to us through the app. as well as this event is brought to you by Brand Worth. Thank you very much. प्रत्यक्ष रूपमा हामीलाई यो समयमा नेपाल टेलिभिजन सँगसँगै डिजिटल इकोनोमी कन्क्लेभ को फेसबुक, ई सेवा को फेसबुक र फोन पे को फेसबुक मार्फत यो समयमा हेरिरहनु भएको छ। म हुँ सञ्जय गुप्ता र अब हामी हाम्रो तेस्रो सेसन तर्फ चाहिँ लाग्ने छौं। We'd like to head on towards our third session. सानो बजार हो कि के हो भन्ने कुरा पनि छ हैन। रेगुलर रूपमा स्मल मार्केट हो र नेपाल हैन। हाउ स्मल इज द मार्केट भन्ने कुरा पनि हामी गर्छौं। सानो देश भनेर पनि हामी भन्छौं हैन। अब रियालिटीमा कुराकानी गर्नु पर्दाखेरि अनट्याप्ड मार्केट हो कि we have abundant amount of possibilities भनेर हामी रेगुलर रूपमा यसको पनि कुराकानी गर्छौं। So the session is called Nepal Small Market or Unlimited Possibilities. So let's dive into this session. I'd like to go ahead and invite the moderator, the president of CJON, Janardhan Baral. Founder of Safal Partners, Mr. Ashutosh Tiwari. As well as the CEO of NIFRA, Ramkrishna Khatiwada. As well as Sri Baba Pokhrel, she's an economist. And the executive director of Gold Star, Vidushi Rana.
नेपाल टेलिभिजन समाचारका साथमा
जगदम्बा अपूर्व शक्ति
फोनमा भन्छ हेलो अनि इन्टरनेटमा हाई टिभी खोली चिल बसो दुनियाँलाई बाई चाकको दम सबैको घरमा अब नेपाल टेलिकम
राष्ट्रको सञ्चार।
नमस्कार, नेपाल टेलिभिजनको यो समाचार बुलेटिनमा यहाँहरूलाई स्वागत छ। म रामप्रसाद भण्डारी। समाचार सुरु गरौँ प्रमुख समाचारबाट। बजेटमाथि सांसदहरूले उठाएका प्रश्नको अर्थमन्त्रीद्वारा जवाफ दिनुहुँदै निजी क्षेत्रलाई पेट्रोलियम पदार्थ आयात गर्न दिने बारे अध्ययन भइरहेको उद्योग मन्त्रीको भनाई। बेलायती महारानीको 70 वर्षे शासन अवधि पूरा, बकिङहम दरबारद्वारा साताव्यापी कार्यक्रमको आयोजना। र आइसिसी अन्डर 19 महिला T20 विश्वकप क्रिकेट एसिया छनौट खेलमा नेपालले विजयी सुरुवात, कतार 79 रनले पराजित।
नेपालमै अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय गुणस्तरबाट